Still standing. Hey, good evening, everyone. It is 7:02 p.m., which means it is time to convene our November 4th, 2021 meeting of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. Nice to see a full house. Thank you all so much for making time in a momentous week. We are beginning at 7:02 on the dot. We are continuing, obviously, with our safety protocols. Please note we are live streaming this meeting. So if you can, do speak up so that those participating electronically or following along with YouTube can hear what's being said. We have one commissioner participating electronically for a medical reason. Senator Bell, are you with us? Not quite yet. Hopefully he's feeling better. We'll keep an eye out there. You can see the meeting slides on either end of the TV screen, and that should also help our listening audience follow along on YouTube. We are back again to voice voting, which should also help us move along expeditiously. We do have a quorum, so let's launch in. We have a full agenda and we have a closed session at the end of the night, so don't forget that as you think about comments and conversation. I do not believe that we've received any public comments this month. Executive Director, that's the case. Okay, so our first order of business is to approve the minutes from our meeting of October 7th. Do I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
All right, Chairman McKay, is there a second? Second. Seconded by Secretary Treasurer Polchak. Is there any further discussion or amendments proposed to the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? You're abstaining from the minutes, just put your hand up so the secretary can see. Okay, no abstentions. Okay, we have a couple of items on our consent agenda tonight. I'm going to hand it over to Kate. One is particularly non-controversial, and as an Arlingtonian, I hope the other is equally non-controversial, but I'll let Kate introduce them both.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And indeed, we have our proposed meeting scheduled for the coming year, which really follows our regular first Thursday of the month, not including August. August is the month off. But I do want to let you know at this time, we do anticipate that we may be canceling the April meeting. That often conflicts with budget hearings. We want to keep it on the calendar for now, but will be working the schedule around and the agendas around and the possibility that April will be canceled. The second one is the commission being asked to endorse Arlington's application to the authority for funding for the Ballston second entrance project. Just be mindful that obviously the endorsement of the commission for NBTA funding doesn't imply any endorsement if the county does come to Nbtc for funding under a commuter choice program. So that may happen, but this is totally a separate situation.
I'm going to take chair's prerogative. If I could, to this letter to just add on, and I might request, unless others object, that we add just one word here, which is in the final sentence of the second paragraph. It reads that the project will provide adequate egress during emergency situations and improve bus to metro transfers for routes entering Ballston from I-66. Could we just clarify that is regional bus routes entering from 66? We anyway believe that this is absolutely a regional project that is going to offer a lot of value for those who are coming via OmniRide, Fairfax Connector, Loudoun Connector, and others. So, okay, so those are the two items on our consent agenda. If there's a motion for approval, I'd love to hear it. So moved. Thank you, Commissioner Polchak. Is there a second?
Sure.
Seconded by Delegate Sullivan. Thank you. Any discussion about either the agenda proposed for 2022 or the letter of support for the Ballston second station engine project? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, I believe that passes unanimously. We're still waiting for Senator Bell, I think. Okay. All right, so we will move right into the meat of our program. We have an opportunity to talk about an item that I think is of great interest to all of us jurisdictionally and statewide, which is zero emissions bus. Sometimes called electrification. Of course, the zero emissions is maybe a slightly broader category. We all, I think, back in our jurisdictions, and certainly the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments has some very ambitious goals on climate change that we are trying to both increase the use of public transit in general and also reduce the amount of emissions of public transit to zero. Of course, conversion is complex, requires a lot of different considerations when it comes to the vehicle types, the ranges of those vehicles, opportunities potentially for shared infrastructure, which we're really excited about NVTC playing a role in. And this topic is also incredibly timely because we know from our conversation with Congressman Beyer, among others, that the federal government is really interested in making big investments in zero emission vehicles. So all of us, I think fair to say, all of our region's 6 bus systems right now are trying to figure out how we can move to zero emissions or full electric vehicles strategically, and how to tap into some of those federal funding programs. So apropos of all of that, our commission staff held a zero emissions bus symposium on the 22nd, which gave our jurisdictions and transit partners a chance to highlight what they were doing, learn from one another. And so I'm really excited to welcome 3 folks to give us a couple of highlights from that zero emissions bus symposium. We have familiar faces, of course, Nbtc Program and Policy Director Alan Fye, our Senior Technology Program Manager Patricia Happ, and we'd like to also give a special welcome to the General Manager of DASH, Josh Baker. Glad to have you in person. Virtually. So we'll hear from them, Josh first, then Patricia, then Alan, and then have an opportunity for discussion and questions at the end, of which I expect there'll be a few. So without further ado, Mr. Baker, welcome. You get the leadoff hitter role tonight.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here in person. Sorry I wasn't able to join you in person last time. But it's nice to come and talk about another thing that is free of emissions, where I was talking about free fares the last time I was here. So in Alexandria, we have taken a very ambitious effort here in the adoption of electrification of our fleet. I'll talk a little bit about the goals here on the next slide. As we went into this program, obviously, as mentioned, environmental sustainability is a really important part of this work. And it's an obligation that we all have to do something about. And so I'm really pleased to hear that the commission has been talking so actively about it, and that regionally there are so many conversations. At DASH, we are endeavoring to have a fully zero emission fleet by 2035 with our phase out of our diesel and hybrid buses that compose our fleet by 2027. And the 2035 benchmark there is just to understand that buses are 12-year, typically a minimum of 12-year duty cycle. So obviously there's going to be buses on the road for quite some time that are out there right now. I wanted to mention that while the environmental component of this is a key and important part of a program like this, there's also, I think, an opportunity to recognize the fiscal benefits of electrification when it comes to operating costs. Recognizing that electric buses and infrastructure are very expensive investments, and we recognize how challenging it can be at times to fund that. But when you think about the long-term benefits of getting away from internal combustion engines, their operating costs, the downtime associated with them, and the variability of fuel costs, as we're all seeing right now, particularly at the pumps, is certainly something to consider and something that we've been thinking about in our zero emission program. So on the next slide, we talk a little bit about some of the studies that we've been doing as we work through this. We work with the Center for Transportation and the Environment. Did I say that right, Ray? Our CTE. We completed a study in 2019 of our feasibility of moving to electrification. Of course, obviously that said, let's do it. We already knew we wanted to do it. It was the question of how do we do it? That followed with a implementation study phase 1, working with WSP, which we completed earlier this year. And we're now in phase 2. Essentially, the first study was, can we do this? Should we do this? How can we do this? And then the remaining studies are the details of implementation, everything from looking at the range of the buses, the technology required, the charging infrastructure required, the investments that we need to make in the short term and long term to sustain this program are all things that we're looking at as a part of those studies. I can talk a little bit about some successes and challenges here on the next slide that we've already recognized. So we've been operating electric buses for over a year now in revenue service. The first ones were introduced around October of last year, and we've seen great success in using them. We've recognized already that they are well received by the community, well received by the riders and the bus operators themselves. They also have shown particularly strong performance in regards to range, particularly in stop and go urban environments like we have around here and in Alexandria. They don't love hills and they don't love highways. So those are things to keep in mind as we move forward with programs like this. Our initial observations are you can see there at the bottom left is that they're coming in about half the cost from a maintenance and operations perspective than a diesel counterpart. And I would just pause to say one of the things that we need to think about is not only the cost per mile, but the cost to the system in regards to the operational reliability. We suffer a lot keeping internal combustion engines on the road. They just frankly stop a lot. And they are very heavily regulated, very heavily controlled on emissions. And that frankly has led to severe reliability issues. So here's another perspective to think about in the long term as it relates to electrification. You have less parts to break, less moving components, less things to maintain. So we're really excited about that. We have recognized some challenges though associated with this program. Interestingly enough, the biggest challenge we have had is with charging the buses. It has not been with keeping the buses on the road. As long as they're charged, they're out there running. But oddly enough, the chargers have a tendency to go down for various reasons. We had struggles with installation. We had struggles with contractors. We've had battles back and forth with getting them in to service them when they break down. And the reality is transit has to be there. People expect us to be there. We've always known that. Our industry has always known that we have an obligation to serve the community under all circumstances and all conditions. And our concern going forward has been how do we resolve the charging infrastructure challenges to make sure that we don't end up with a fleet that simply can't run. Because that creates a whole nother slew of issues that we don't want to be facing. So that is going to be something we're focused very much on in the coming months and frankly, years of this program is building the redundancy and the infrastructure to support charging. A couple of other things we've noticed is that they haven't figured out heating the buses. Traditional buses and even automobiles generate heat from the internal combustion process, and that heat is captured and used in the cabin. Without an engine, you don't generate heat. And if you're generating the heat from the battery, upwards of almost 60% of the battery consumption of that bus can be dedicated to heating and the loss of heat when you stop and open the doors and close them. So we're hopeful and working hard with manufacturers to bring new technology to heating. And we think that that's going to be a big thing that's going to change in the next couple of years. It's going to further advance the range and viability of electrification. The last thing that I would note here is that as with everything, timeframes for delivery, build, design, build, delivery process is lengthy and getting longer by the day. But when we did our first set of electric buses, we were able to get them within about 9 months. That has now gone well over a year. It is typical for buses to take about a year to build, but we're looking upwards of a year and a half, almost 2 years when you deal with supply issues, supply chain issues and manufacturing. So just some things that we're looking at and trying to resolve as we work through this program. The next slide is just a quick snapshot of one of the outcomes of our implementation plan. You cannot see it here, but this structure is adjacent to the current DASH facility. The DASH facility is landlocked, much like any other transit facilities are in this region. So we are very limited in what we can do. Our internal bus storage is already beyond capacity. So this is a smart scale program, right, Ray? That we worked to apply for and were awarded. And this is going to be to construct, at this point, it's probably going to be a frame structure, not enclosed, from a cost shortage. But what it's going to do is it's going to house over 40 electric buses. And it is designed to put the chargers and infrastructure on the roof to conserve space. And then you can also see a diagram here that the charging infrastructure will actually come down and touch the roof of the bus to charge them as opposed to the plugging in and unplugging processes that many have seen. So we think that's a really exciting way to approach this. And we believe that that's the future. We've designed all of our buses to accommodate both styles of charging. But as the region looks towards implementation of more electric buses, we're going to have to think about on-route charging, the mention of sharing this infrastructure and the power required to do this. When one of these buses contacts one of these high output chargers, you can face significant demands on the power infrastructure. And so we need those investments, and we've been working with Dominion, and we're hopeful to see more partnerships coming out of the power companies to make this happen. I don't know why they wouldn't. They have nothing but something to gain. But the challenge is getting that infrastructure in place. So just some things to consider. I'll wrap up here by talking a little bit about our next steps on the next slide. We're going to continue to evaluate our service. One of the things to consider in programs like this is, does your service profile meet the strengths of an electric bus? Does the bus have to go out at 4 a.m. and not come back until midnight? An electric bus is probably not going to be able to do that. Are there ways to modify your service profile to make that work? If not, is there in-route charging that can make it possible for that bus to run the equivalent of what a diesel would otherwise run? So considering the service design and the profiles that are necessary to support electrification, identifying sustainable contracts and sources of procurements. This is another challenging area we've recently seen in Virginia. We've run into an issue where the Virginia contracts are no longer available for heavy duty buses. And I know DRPT has been working through that, trying to resolve that, but there are challenges there. Training is an important component here and something that I think we can easily fall behind on. If we don't fund the training necessary for the technicians and the people who keep these buses running to understand how to use them and how to maintain them, we're going to be in a tight spot because these are very different. You're dealing with high voltage, dangerous electricity that can shock and kill someone in a moment. And so it's very important that training is in place. We're continuing to collect data. We're happy to come back and talk to you about that in the future. But our buses, all the electric buses on the road today, gather data every second that they're on the road. They tell us how much battery usage they've been drawing, where, when, where they were, when they were, what the temperature was outside, what was the performance of the battery, how much of the battery power went to heating and cooling versus how much of it was acceleration. How did the driver do? Those kinds of things. So we're looking at that. And we're continuing to find ways to collect that information and analyze it. And of course, the last thing here that I would mention is obviously funding. We know that the administration on the federal level is looking to bring more federal funds to these programs. But historically, when you look at programs like low emission, no emission, or low no, and bus facilities, they are oversubscribed and they are divided out fairly evenly across the country. So while DASH is looking towards some of these discretionary grant programs, because that's really the only option here, we understand and recognize that they are not the solution to bridge the gap of funding that's required. And we're estimating that over the next 10 years to be $55 million gap to get from the diesel equivalent of buses to electrification. So we're working really hard to try to find ways to plug that and make sure that we can stay on track for our electrification program. So just some things to consider. And that wraps up my slides. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much. I think we'll have presentations from Ellen and Patricia
Sure,
next, and
sure.
we'll do all of our questions at once. Appreciate it.
Right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about NBTC's zero emission bus efforts. We held a zero emission bus symposium on October 22nd, attended by more than 50 regional partner staff. And the purpose was to share information and share expertise, and at the same time for regional partners to learn from each other and for NVTC to hear what the concerns and constraints are within the region. And so the event had a speaker from APTA who basically gave like a zero emission bus 101, and then Dash and Omada shared their story of their implementation of zero emission buses. And then we had a representative from IBI Group who provided the talked a lot about the planning and infrastructure and technology involved in implementing and running zero emission buses. And finally, we had a speaker from Virginia Clean Cities who kind of brought the whole thing together and talked about the funding piece, which underlies all of this, building zero emission buses. So we had a robust discussion. There were many questions, and it was really a fulfilling event. We learned a lot, and so some of the things, I'll just touch on a few of the items that we learned about. First of all, that end-to-end planning is essential. So basically building your plan up front. And then, it's really essential to prepare in terms of establishing needs and priorities and partnering with utilities, and also building a plan for funding. And we also learned that regional partners are seeking information on the specifics of bus performance and the charging infrastructure, as well as the workforce planning and the grid resiliency. So basically keeping the buses charged appropriately. We also learned that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. And so, each agency has their own unique fleet strategies, sustainability goals, and constraints. And so we also learned that there was a huge opportunity to realize economies of scale across the region by working together. And so Nbtc, we have a model that we've used with transit technology and regional fare collection, which is to, providing regionally integrated effort, but allowing for local flexibility to meet each individual agency's needs. And so this could work for the zero emission bus. Next slide, please. So you can see from this chart that all of the regional partners are interested in zero emission buses, and most are developing studies or pilots. And pilots meaning small deployments in preparation for a larger deployment later on. And so we recognize that zero emission buses and bus planning will be a regional effort, and that will need to work closely with funding and utility partners. So we listed a few of those potential partners at the bottom there. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Alan, who will talk about NVTC's role.
All right, thank you, Patricia. First of all, before I start into my slide, I do want to recognize the work that Patricia and her team did to pull off this event. It was many, many months in the planning, pulling all the speakers together. So kudos to the work that you did on that. We learned a lot, but I think one of the biggest things we learned was we're just at the very tip of the iceberg with this. And I think that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about here. So far with the two presentations, I think the word that keeps floating to the top is regional and planning and coordination. Something Mvtc does. I'll pat ourselves on the back with that, but it's something we do well. And I think there's an opportunity here for us to do that. What we want to do going forward is continue to engage like we always do, learning from what Dash is doing, what ART is doing. You just received an award not too long ago for low emission buses. So the work is going on there, elevating the work that's been done, learning from each other, and then figuring out how to move forward as a region. As we've heard a couple of times, what are the resources we need to do that? One of the examples that we've been brainstorming and bantering around is potentially maybe a DRPT technical assistance grant to maybe look at doing a regional strategic plan for zero emission buses, kind of like the model that Patricia just mentioned. It's been successful so far. The results of that have been, wow, we moved from a fare collection system that was falling apart to one that is now recovering and really moving in the right direction. We have a strong model to do that. Going forward, after we get some of your guidance tonight and some of your questions, we want to make sure that we stay very much engaged on this very, very important, timely topic with the commission, with our committees, figure out the right path and the right way for us to move forward on this topic. Just because this topic has come up in a couple of different places, not just at the commission, it also came out the program advisory committee not too long ago. We were talking about the commuter choice program. So we worked very closely with the members of that committee to talk about how zero emissions buses fits into that program. I think we're going to be looking very closely at that over the next year and figuring out the right time to implement any of those potential changes for that program. So that's a very, very quick snapshot of how we see Nbtc continuing to move forward in this world. And we're now happy to take questions and discuss with you all. So thank you.
Well, thank you three so much. I think maybe it makes sense to start with just questions about what we're learning, what Dash is learning, what we learned substantively at the symposium, and then I will make sure that we wrap up with some thoughts about what we hope for next for the commission's role to be. We'll start in Mr. Walkinshaw.
Thank you, man. Thank you all for the presentation. One is just kind of a editorial comment and then lead into a question. But I think about this a lot. This is an important effort, and we all need to get here as soon as we can. I think, especially for those of us with longer routes, it's a practical challenge. But I also try to remind myself that every day in Fairfax County, and probably every jurisdiction here, there are building inspectors and code enforcement investigators and other county staff that get one person into an internal combustion engine powered vehicle and drive all around the county, and the per passenger mile emissions from those trips are much more significant than a diesel bus that's filled with passengers. So we got to be equally committed to that effort. And it's relevant to this conversation because I do have a question in terms of charging infrastructure. So we have a challenge having the charging infrastructure to electrify that fleet also. What are there interoperability options so that the charging facilities, equipment, technology that you need for these buses can also be used for passenger vehicles? Are they entirely different systems that aren't interoperable at all?
So
Plugs are different, obviously, but
Sure. Interoperability is one of the things we focused on in regards to the bus fleet itself, because we do have a mixed fleet from different manufacturers, and we actually intentionally bought different buses from different manufacturers and have two different sets of chargers. The chargers themselves are pretty big devices. I don't know the answer. Ray, is it possible to plug a car into one of those chargers, or is?
Yeah, so physically, yes, the bus chargers and the car chargers are the same connectors. Where we see issues with or challenges with interoperability is having different systems of different manufacturers, bus versus bus or bus versus car, establishing connections and just communicating with each other. The physical connectors, the different OEMs have reached a standardization on. So as far as the firmware and the software is for different systems, different vehicles that talk with different chargers, there are guidelines, but there are not yet hard standards that different manufacturers have to follow today.
That's been that was part of the effort with the two different bus manufacturers, kind of forcing them to allow to charge each other. And we had an interesting moment where they started out charging each other fine, and then all of a sudden some updates must have been loaded on the buses, and then they stopped being willing to charge. And so Ray, by the way, Raymond Wee is my assistant general manager. He does many of the capital projects at Dash, has been very heavily involved in this, got on the phone with them and said, something's changed. You need to fix it. I think that's going to be a long-term thing that we have to be very active about, because the manufacturers inherently would rather just make it work with their own plug. Think about your iPhone versus your Android. Apple just wants to use their plug. So
I guess operationally, there maybe is if you're building a facility, right, and you're tearing up the ground to lay the conduit and the kind of wires that you need, there is a possibility of kind of doing both at one facility and saving some money that way.
I think that will make a lot of sense.
Okay, thanks.
I saw Mr. Alcor next.
Thank you, Alexandria, for piloting this, being the first to really pioneer it. I guess my question is, as you're getting all this data, as you're learning these things, can you share everything you can?
Yeah.
Strongly encourage you, if it's possible, to put it out there, because I've learned a lot just in the last 15 minutes. I know there are a lot of other folks in my jurisdiction, County, that could really benefit from this. In particular, it sounds like you've done some things strategically, using a couple of different bus manufacturers So even information about all sorts of performance information is super helpful. And I realize it's going to be changing over time, but that's going to be the more we can all share data like that, I think the better.
We really see our role in this is to help answer those questions and support each other. So we're more than happy. We've even taken our buses to other jurisdictions, let them try them on their route, see, does it work for them? We're happy to do any of that. And from a data collection standpoint, I would just mention that starting to analyze that data is where we are. And as soon as we have that information, we are more than happy to share it with anyone who's interested and the commission.
Great, and post it if you can.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And echo that. And so Mr. Turner next, then Ms. Garvey.
Thank you. I'm struck by this chart and I want to follow up on Walter's comments. What strikes me is rather than trying to do this sequentially by regional jurisdiction, I mean, I heard one size does not fit all, but I gotta believe that 85, 90% of this is boilerplate template. And rather than sequentially learning each region at a time, I mean, we've got everybody's interested that 6 and 5 of the 6 are pilots and studies. Are the pilots and studies talking to each other? Because it should be. I mean, I would really like to see more of a structured, facilitated by Nbtc, structured organization where all the regions sign on and say, we're going to have regular meetings. We're all going to progress equally. We're going to get the same kind of buses. We're going to get the same kind of learning. We're going to get the same kind of charger infrastructure. And I got to believe we can hit pretty significant economies of scale when we are a single Northern Virginia regional customer for all of these kinds of things and regularly sharing the information that we're learning instantaneously rather than sequentially. I just think we could really save ourselves some money as a region and also expedite this process.
So Mr. Turner, I think you're talking about maybe a regional strategic implementation plan for zero fare buses. We could get perhaps DRPT to pay for 50% of the cost of that study. I'm joking because this is actually where we're headed tonight. I think one of the things, I'll go ahead and tee it up now. I agree wholeheartedly. Whether that's joint procurement, potentially shared charging infrastructure. I think there's a ton of opportunity for us collectively. And so I know that staff has begun to think about developing an application to DRPT for a grant that would support that kind of regional strategic implementation plans. And that application is due February, is that right?
That will be February.
Great. So, and it is a 50% state funded effort. So just as we're putting dollars on the table, do we have some estimates about what that would cost for the commission?
So, I mean, we're looking at this, probably could do something, a pretty good thing around $200,000.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm really supportive of this for all the reasons I think Mr. Turner just put so compellingly. So maybe as we continue with questions, be thinking about that. And if that is the consensus of the commission, I think that's maybe the action item we could leave staff with tonight.
And Madam Chair, to clarify, we've come back for the approval for that application, but at least we want to know the scope of that.
Yeah. Thank you. Ms. Garfield.
Yeah, thank you. First, I'll just say, I think a regional approach is great. That said, it's wonderful of Alexandria to be doing this and finding out all these problems yourself before, like, we all discovered it together. So it's really nice for you to discover it for us. So thank you. You said that buses don't like hills. So does that mean they just really slow down? They use a lot of power? What does that mean?
Well, two parts. One is the power train that is on the bus as far as its gearing and making sure it's capable of handle hills. We really don't have a lot in Alexandria, but there was also sort of a cautionary note to recognize that the power consumption associated with a lot of ups and downs. If you have in your jurisdiction significant hilly areas, it can affect the performance of the vehicle as compared to what we relatively do in Alexandria, which is a lot of slow speed, stop and go kind of stuff. So, but I think that it's certainly not an issue that would preclude you from pursuing it. It's just something to consider as a part of the performance of the vehicles. And again, to the point of the planning process, right, recognizing your service profile and how that service profile aligns with the capacity of today's electric buses as opposed to what needs to happen in the future.
We have hills, but they tend to be far from where I think the charging would be. So that's something to think about. And I had one other question, but how much of an issue is the power to have enough electricity to charge these? Because these are big, and so now we've got a few of them, and what if we get like enough to really have all these fleets? Can Dominion Power actually send us that much power? I see head nodding from that.
It's an issue that we've been talking about. Yeah, that's why I'm not.
And it's great.
Madam Chair, if I could.
Well, I don't know if Ms. Garvey got an answer to that.
No, no, I'm done. Guys.
Okay.
Whoever answered, I'm sort of tossing
Great.
it out as an issue. and I'd
Thank
love to
you.
hear
And I'm so sorry, but I did see Director Mitchell, and I think she may have had something to say about the DRPT grant.
Yeah, I just wanted to, in response to the comment about joint procurements, DRPT actually provides a statewide contract for electric buses that our transit agencies can utilize. We actually have a legislative problem right now that is holding us up from being able to reissue that procurement right now. And I won't go into the details because it's very hard to explain, but I'll be sure to share that with NVTC so that if it is something that can be addressed through legislation this year. But that is something that we have been able to provide. I can't remember, Josh, if you guys used our state contract or I know, yes, I'm seeing yes. So anyway, that is a tool that's out there, but we'll keep you updated on the proposed legislative fix.
Thank you. Okay, now Mr. Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I was gonna, I want to ask Libby's question maybe a little differently. I'd like to hear from Josh. I know what Omada is looking at right now. The real challenge is getting the power there. So tell us a little bit about working with the power company to get, the proper conduits into the facility to get the charging stations up and running. How did that go? And are there lessons learned there that you didn't amplify on tonight that could help? Because that is a real challenge we're finding out.
If I can add this, my
Metro.
part of the question is to get all the conduits there. At the other end, is the power there to go into the conduits to come? That's-
Yeah, that's a big complexity of all of this is our current facility with the chargers that we've installed has maxed out the available capacity, what's coming in through the transformer. So these plans that we have in place for the expansion of the facility also address putting additional transformers in and whatnot. Now, as far as the conversation about how that power gets to the building, how sustainable it is, also think about the redundancy. If the power goes out, how do you charge your fleet? And our building right now has a diesel generator. And the diesel generator keeps the building on. Is that diesel generator able to charge those buses? Probably not, maybe a few, but what else do you have to put in place? And that's sort of where we are in our next step. We have a couple of years, fortunately, before we're writing more checks for buses, but essentially to say that has been a major challenge for us. And we do have our energy manager for the city of Alexandria, Bill Egger, has been working on this issue. And if at future commission meetings, there's a desire to talk more in detail about the power side of this, I would recommend inviting him. And I think he would be a really good perspective, because the other thing we've tried to talk with Bill about is not only can you get enough power there, but how do you get to a sustainable power? But, who knows what you're charging the bus with? What's the source of the power generation of that? And that is a larger conversation that's a little harder for us and our staff capacity at Dash to really get into and answer. But I think to your point, it is a major issue that we've got to figure out a solution to in the short and long term. We'd love to just tap into Metro's power coming off the rails and maybe charge our buses. But who knows?
And Madam Chair, I think maybe that should be added to a regional discussion, because I know it is a real challenge working with the power company to get that power there. And that's a whole separate but important issue to this debate.
And the more elected leaders that we can have advocating for this to be something that's addressed will really help us in our process, because that's a really challenging conversation and infrastructure solution that we've got to figure out.
We've got a whole bunch of hands before we get to second or third questions.
follow up,
Let's make
that's
sure we
okay.
can do first question. I saw, okay, I think Mr. DeFrente.
So I just, I think the grant and the study is important. I guess maybe when we come back to finalize the study, I would love to to try to not an irresponsible marker, but to put a marker, because the last slide that you had talks about steps and work, and I neither want to overcommit staff to doing things that are not realistic, but I also would like to, at some point, say, we are going to do this. That is a bit of set a date or set a process for joint procurement or some of the, just thinking, try to think about what's a responsible way to take a policy step in addition to the planning road that we're going to go on. Because I feel like that's an outcome that is sort of, could be appropriate for the commission to try to put out there, but don't want to do it in a vacuum vis-a-vis staff and what's possible. So I don't know what that is, but perhaps when we come to a grant or when there's some study, we could come towards something that says, we're going to do these things, because it struck me in the DASH presentation that you're just doing them. And if you don't put that urgency, I worry that it would not happen quite as easily.
Harvey, please. All right. Yeah, so way down in the weeds, just, so are there any buses that are designed so that instead of the bus coming in, sitting still and getting charged for a while, that the bus comes in, you take out the battery, you put another battery in and it drives off? And so that you keep a stock of batteries on hand rather than having to charge, you charge them so that the buses keep going. Is that, because you'd have to have an easily removed and replaced battery. Is that something?
Yeah, not that we've seen. The investment has really been in the overhead catenary chargers, which are capable of charging the bus in a very, very short amount of time. So one thing to think about is that you can run an electric bus 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, assuming that every time it makes a trip, it has a certain number of minutes touching a charger. We don't have that in place right now. We see it as a part of the future. Maybe it's at metro rail stations. Maybe it's in other areas where the bus is able to lay over. But if you can get that 2 to 3 minutes every trip, just enough time for the passengers to board and alight, that potentially can keep that vehicle on the road for a much longer period of time, if not indefinitely.
Right.
So I think that's the solution that they're working towards versus trying to change the batteries.
I didn't realize how fast they could do it. Thank you.
So
Yeah.
I saw Mr. Meyer and then Mr. Turk.
This is sort of a first cousin to that question, and that is, has there been any consideration to designing buses where the power source to move the bus in terms of its engine going forward and lights and things versus heating and air conditioning, having separate battery systems for those things which could be considered ancillary to actually having the bus move?
Yeah,
Have there been any thoughts about that?
I think that the manufacturers have not focused on that mainly because they have maxed out the capacity, the weight capacity of the bus with today's technology of batteries. So when you think about the gross vehicle weight and the limitations once you add passengers to the batteries, I think that they're putting as many batteries as they can on for the drivetrain and combining that. But to your point, I think what we're probably going to see is investment in heat pump technology on the vehicles. The car manufacturer Tesla has actually already done this, where they have a heat pump just like you use for your home, which is highly efficient and has a significantly less consumption of electricity than a traditional electric heat. Seeing that adapted to buses, I think, is within the next couple of years. And I think we'll go a long way to solve this problem. On the cooling side, we really don't have the issues. It doesn't take as much energy to cool the bus. It's really that heat generation. Yeah.
Thank you.
On charging the buses, tapping into the existing electric grid. Out in Loudoun County, we've got a number of environmental issues that we're moving on. One of them is a consultant study on community choice aggregation, where you hire a third-party marketer or broker to bring in sustainable energy into a particular region. So we can say all of Loudoun County or just the data center industry. I would think you could set up a CCA so it is designed to market, it pulls off sustainable energy off the eastern seaboard and brings it straight in just for your community's bus recharging infrastructure. You could also get solar PPA power purchase agreements specifically designed for specific buildings. So your job is to go find sustainable energy for this building, for this function in this building, and sign that kind of. I'm fascinated by, I've got a plug-in Prius, and when I want to run electric, I avoid hills like the plague, and I run cold in the winter wintertime. I just wear an extra coat. Because I'm gonna- That's exactly right. I discovered just exactly the same features. I used to slow down going up hills thinking I'm using less energy. I thought, wait a minute, it takes exactly the same potential energy. You go from the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill. Whether I do it fast or slow, it's going to be the same amount of energy. It's fascinating. It's the same evolution. I think.
Right. I think I'm going to wrap us up there just to keep us on time, but I can understand how this would fill a whole symposium. So I think maybe we could anticipate that we will see some planning come forward for an application if it's due in February, maybe December, January timeline. We'll talk again as the commission and figure out really how we can develop the most bang for our collective buck. I am, to put a marker down, knowing how rapidly these buses can charge. I am really excited about, we know that there are points of connection either in our system already because we have in the inner core jurisdictions, places where those longer haul buses deposit people and connect to a metro, there's charging potential, whether it's the future of BRT like Envision Route 7 or on Route 1 where they're crossing from jurisdictions. I think the opportunity for a regional solution to those touch points, as Mr. Baker put so compellingly, is really exciting among others. So I'll look forward to that. I think I've yet to see anything but an enthusiastic nod at the idea. So we're glad to see you dedicate some time to it. And Mr. Baker and team, thank you again for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
And then I think we also have, this is just a written report, right, is the regional fare collection update, which continues to be an area of interest as well. But you'll find that in your meeting materials. So we will move right on then to the commuter choice program. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you.
You'll be rotated in and out with Mr. Van Owen to talk to us about round 5. Since we just finished round 4, but here we are. We have the action item tonight of authorizing Kate to Ms. Matthijs to issue a call for projects. So Mr. Owen will tee that up for our action tonight. Thank you.
Great. Yes, we did just finish round 4 a few weeks ago. So on to the next one. So we are seeking one commuter choice action tonight, authorizing us to open the round 5 call for projects covering fiscal years 23 through 24. This being for commuter choice on the I-66 corridor. So at this time, we are conservatively anticipating $12 million available for projects over that 2-year period, with the possibility of more, depending on how inside the Beltway toll paying traffic and revenues trend over the period. So we would be opening the application period for our eligible applicants on Monday. We would have it open through the end of January. We will be providing links to the application form to all of our eligible applicants and publishing updated program guidance materials. Among other updates, our new recipient handbook will now clarify the eligibility of zero emission vehicles and related infrastructure for commuter choice funding. By spring, looking at our timeline, should have mentioned next slide, we would expect to have completed our eligibility review and technical evaluation. We would both convene the program advisory committee to endorse a draft program of projects. We'd also be holding our public comment period to get input on the projects under consideration for funding. And then, as per usual, we anticipate June program selection by the commission and approval by Commonwealth Transportation Board, hopefully a more traditional approval process with this program than we had with round 4. We have started our applicant engagement around the round 5 process. We held an introductory webinar late last month. We will be holding one-on-one workshops with prospective applicants over the next month to review their project ideas. And we really are hoping to foster as transformative, impactful, and cost-effective of a set of projects as we can, so that we can make a very compelling case for the program, both in terms of round 5 funding and commuter choice in the 66 corridor more generally. So before we move on to the action, I'll be happy to take any questions you have. A couple notes about our 395 round 2 program, which received its approvals in June. Many of the 13 projects in that program are now underway. We are seeing some very good initial results from that, looking at transit services that are in place now. So as you've heard about recently, Dash also, besides doing a lot of zero emission buses, launched a new set of enhancements in early September funded by the program to 2 of their local routes, along with restructuring their entire network and going fare free. So one of those routes, serving the west end of Alexandria, has seen average weekday ridership more than double in the first month of the expanded service to roughly about 3,000 average weekday trips. This is a function of more frequent service that we're supporting on the route, every 10 minutes weekdays, 15 minutes weekends, as well as an extension to the Pentagon, along with the network going fare-free and generally being restructured to meet riders' needs more effectively. But besides that, OmniRide also added trips in June to 2 of their commuter routes in the I-95 corridor, going from Stafford County up to the Pentagon in DC. One of those, the one to the Pentagon, has basically rebounded to its pre-COVID ridership levels. And the other one up to DC is seeing steady growth month over month in terms of ridership. So we will keep monitoring and sharing the good news as it breaks.
That is so heartening.
Yeah.
I think we've all been really struggling with thinking about how we lure riders back to our systems, and knowing that expanding service has been a key is really exciting. Questions for Mr. Owen? Okay, seeing none, we do need a motion to authorize our executive director to issue the call for projects. May I have that motion? Thank you, Mr. Snyder, seconded by Chairman McKay. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously, Mr. Owen, thank you. We move now, of course, into a very topical item, our Omada report, and I'm going to ask both members, glad to have them both in person, Mr. Smedberg and Mr. Letourneau, to begin with your report.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm just going to turn it over to Matt. As you know, Matt chairs the Finance Committee at Omada. So our focus today was on the budget. The general manager proposed his budget. So Matt's going to take it from here, and I'll end with a few other points.
Yeah, great to see everybody in person, first of all, especially. So we did have a finance committee meeting today that featured the general manager's FY23 budget proposal. Metro runs well ahead of the county and the city jurisdictions for that timing because of all the public hearing requirements that are part of the process. I think there's a couple of sort of important things to know. One of them is that the proposal assumes a ridership of 53% of pre-pandemic levels. We're currently somewhere between 30 and 35%, depending on the day. So it assumes some recovery up to 53%. The biggest issue facing us is, and I've mentioned this before, is the application of federal funding. And if you look at continuing the type of service that we're offering now, putting aside the changes that have been made for the derailment, but looking at the type of headways that you'd expect to see on Metro versus that 53% ridership level, your revenue is not sustainable, especially considering the 3% legislative cap for jurisdictional subsidies. So, those will go up, but, not dramatically. So what we see when we look at that budget is passenger revenue proposed at somewhere around 293 million, non-passenger, which is things like advertising, about 81 million, total revenue of 374 against 2.2 billion in expenses. That creates an operating deficit of about 1.9 billion. The subsidies that come in are about 1.1. So that leaves a gap of $715.8 million. That gap is made up by applying that federal revenue, that federal funding that we have. And so for FY23, we're able to do that. The issue really is when you look forward to FY24, that funding will run out. And so today, sort of for the first time in the public square, Metro released that funding gap number, which is $519.3 million. There is 151 million proposed that would be left of the federal funds to apply to the FY24 budget. I did ask the question today, what happens if ridership does not recover to 53%? Of course, that means we'd be dipping into the 150 million sooner. So at what level does that all evaporate? And they're going to get back to us with that answer. I certainly hope that that isn't the case and we do get to 53%, but it's prudent to ask that question. The issue is looking at the federal funding, it was provided to us to keep the system operating. I think there's certainly that regional expectation that we do that and to keep people employed. And so I think it really would sort of violate the trust from the federal government if we took steps to decrease service, decrease workforce, and so on. We would be doing that to try to sort of stave off the evaporation of the federal funds. But you're not going to make that big of a difference unless you really make dramatic changes. And that's not where we are. We want to be part of the recovery.
So that's just a big issue that we're gonna have to deal with in FY '24. I think it's gonna be a state issue, a federal issue, and potentially a jurisdictional issue. So we want to be as loud as we can be about that from now all the way through so that it doesn't sneak up on us. We're certainly not alone. New York, SEPTA, BART, MBTA in Boston, everybody else has this type of issue to varying degrees. So just a conversation we need to be part of. A couple of fare changes have been proposed by the general manager. One of them is a two-night, late-night rail fare, a flat fee of $2. Sorry, I said two-night, I meant $2 late-night rail fare. $2 for one-way trips from 9:30 until closing. Discounted monthly passes. He's proposing a 6-month promotional period for a discounted 7-day unlimited pass. And then what they call an add value bonus, where for every $25 that you would place on your card, you would get an extra $5 bonus. And you know, those all do have costs associated with them. Just trying to get to my, so for instance, the add value bonus would have about an $8 million revenue impact for us. The fare discounts are relatively minimal. The late night $2 flat fare only has about a $1 million revenue impact. So the revenue impact for those fare simplification or fare bonus proposals is only about $11 million. There are certainly other things that the Metro board could put on the table. And we have had some discussions about some other things. So we're going to have those discussions in the next couple of weeks. The budget includes a subsidy increase for the jurisdictions of 3%. There are some legislative exclusions, which include the Juneteenth holiday, some safety issues, Silver Line Phase 2, and the Potomac Yard Station. So this is, you know, today was really the beginning of the process, certainly not the end. It's a relatively stable budget this year, actually, though, when you look at it in comparison to some years because of the fact that we have that federal money to be able to use. And then maybe just one other thing before I turn it back to Paul, which is that some of you probably saw that the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority announced substantial completion just on Silver Line Phase 2, not on the rail yard. So that is an important point. We cannot operate any of the extension without having the rail yard in place. That said, it's still good news. It's welcome news. It's overdue news. And then that will sort of start the process by which it's kind of an interim step for Metro and then full-on testing for Metro. I don't think Metro is prepared to give a timeline on any of that right now, but it's indicative that there has been progress, that a lot of the issues, especially on the rail line, have been resolved. And now we're sort of into kind of the final stages of figuring out some of those things that will go into an escrow potentially to deal with down the road. But good news on that front.
And just to amplify that a little bit, because some of you have asked questions about it this evening. So, you know, just to give you some idea. So this declaration was made today. Testing starts, Matt said, you know, the rail yard is not part of that yet, but there's a series of 200 plus tests that have to take place in addition to clearing up some of the items that may still be on the list. Probably minor at this point, classified minor at this point. And then the MSC, the Washington Metropolitan Safety Commission, will then have to do its work to verify that the lines and the tracks and the car, you know, and the software and everything is all safe. And then they have to certify that. And then testing on the yard and the tracks and the things are connecting properly and everything's working properly. And then it would eventually come to the board in addition to some other steps. So, you know, there's still a ways to go, but as Matt said, this is a really significant step today and we can formally begin that process, which is a good thing. So one other quick thing, Madam Chair, you know, about the derailment, as you probably are aware, the National Transportation Safety Board is conducting an investigation with Omada right now. It's ongoing. Those investigations typically take anywhere between 12 and 18 months. They are controlling the information that is released about what's happening in addition to what we can say or not say. So it's very limited at this point, you know, what we know to a large degree and what we can say. But we can say Metro staff is working very collaboratively with the Safety Commission or the NTSB, to get, look at what happened and why. So that's moving forward. The Safety Commission will also be, looking at this. We formally submitted a plan today to the Safety Commission to help us get the 7,000 cars, 7,000 series cars back into service. They account for 60% of the Metro fleet. So it's critical at this point that we get, have the ability to get some of those online to help cut down on the headways and the crowding that's currently taking place on the trains. Moving forward, as part of that plan, operationally, we would be looking at inspecting trains every 8 days. So pretty significant shift there. But again, to get those trains back on, back on the rail, back on the tracks. So I think that's where we are right now. We're obviously, as a board, following this as closely as we can. We will be hiring a safety advisor for the board. We currently do not have a safety expert on the board. We had one recently, Devin Rouse, who was a federal appointee, but with change of administrations, was replaced. We're looking to get someone on as quickly as possible. We should have someone on fairly quickly to help us, just to make sure we're analyzing the information correctly, asking the right questions, and see how we address safety as a board and as an organization moving forward. And I'm sure there are going to be a lot of lessons learned and potentially pretty significant changes moving forward because of this. Also, the FTA, in sort of a rare move, issued a national alert on Saturday for the other systems nationwide that have similar wheel sets, as they call them, and operate with similar type of trains. So that was issued nationally. It's pretty rare that they do that, but they did that, we assume, based on some of the things they're finding here because of the investigation. So, probably more to come on that.
Delegate Sullivan will allow me, could you just, the report that was submitted today to the Metro Safety Commission, how soon does that propose to get the 7,000 series back?
Well, it depends. They have to certify that plan. And if, let's say they certify it tomorrow, it could take up to, 2.5 weeks to get things in,
But on the timeline roughly.
Yeah, it won't be all of them.
Yeah.
But it would be, at least you could start getting them in the rotation.
Yeah, I think when they do come back, so with that level of frequency of inspection, there's still gonna be significant service impacts. We're gonna be taking trains out of service much more often than we were previously. But we don't know how quickly the Metro Rail Safety Commission will move and review, other than today they said they will review it expeditiously. And then it will get submitted to the NTSB that will then either approve or not of that plan on their own timeline.
On their own time. But there's definitely a sense of urgency. And and the general manager and I have been meeting with stakeholders, talking to stakeholders.
And I cut the line. Delegate Sullivan, thanks for allowing me. Over to you.
Madam Chair, anytime. Matt, Mr. Paterno, I'm sure there's a complicated answer to this question, but maybe you can just give us the short version. How did you come up with 53? Such a specific number, not 55 or 50.
It is.
What's the methodology?
I even have a nice chart.
I'm sure.
We'll show you.
I got 20.
It's actually, it's based on the actual number of riders projected, which is about 166 million, which then they extrapolate that back to what pre-pandemic was. We had a whole board process actually kind of mid-pandemic to try to set forward formulas by which we could try to judge this. And it's really based on what we expect to happen in the economy. What happens when a certain percentage of the federal workforce comes back. Those sorts of metrics are kind of what went into that. We get all the way up to 75% FY25, and then we don't project past that. So it is a specific number. It's a number though that could have wide variance. But basically we kind of had to pick something that made sense.
It's not a guess.
No,
No,
right,
no,
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 it's
no.
not a guess. It's a, there was a lot of, and I'm not, I mean, there was a whole
They run all
whole
kinds of
formula that
models.
went into it that got back to, you know, if X happens and Y happens, then what's the likelihood of those? And it's been amended throughout this sort of process. As we, you know, very well could be that we look at it again prior to the final adoption of the 23 budget because we'll have more information later in the year, you know, or early next year. But for the purposes of giving the general manager kind of his, you know, his, as we do, we call it fiscal guidance in my jurisdiction. Many probably do the same thing. You tell your county manager or executive going in sort of what your parameters are. This was kind of what the board was working with for those parameters.
Thank you. Ms. Butcher next. Thank you. My question is a little bit related, but first, happy to hear some good news today. I know a lot of
No, it
work
is good
ahead.
news. It is.
So my question is more around the proposal for the fare reductions. I mean, excited to hear that there is a proposal, only $11 million to try to increase ridership, I assume is one of the main goals. Are there, I guess, is it possible to have any projections? Because you talked about the cost, but I'm wondering that, you know, any increased revenue and ridership for those proposals.
So the revenue impact numbers are supposed to include the additional revenue from ridership. That said, I did ask today for specific trip information at the meeting, which has not been provided by staff. So hopefully we'll get that information in the follow-up.
And Dahlia, all the studies that are done with our riders and other groups, generally speaking, price is not a determining factor. It's reliability in the headways. But, you know, we really do think, given the time and all that's happening, it's better to try to at least provide some incentives to get people out of their cars and on, you know, back on transit. So that's sort of the goal with that. The price in and of itself is not generally a determining factor.
The headways, so for AM PM rush, the budget proposal is 5-minute headways on red, 10-minute on everything else. All day, 6-minute red, 12-minute on everything else, and late night, 10 and 15.
Okay. I mean, much bigger impact, I would imagine, than new fare products.
Yeah.
Thank you. I saw Supervisor Faust, Mr. Turner, and then Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, two questions. You may have addressed it. First one, the level of service on the silver line, phase 1 and 2 in your budget is at what level?
So the level of service would be 10-minute headways during rush hour, 12-minute all day on silver.
What was it before?
Or 5,
Yeah.
7, 8, something like that. wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was 8.
And, I assume that that's something that is still on the table, can be negotiated.
I mean, it has a budgetary impact, so we would have to decide that up front. I think it's a little bit pegged to what the ridership projection is, because, you know, you as it is today, we're running trains that are very empty. Now, again, not at this particular moment because of the derailment, but prior to that happening, when we had the 7000 series, we were, you know, trains are, so it's, you know.
I think it was a $550 million deficit in year 2, something in that range.
Yep.
I mean, that's not that far away, actually.
No,
No. In our world. And with the 3% limit on, I assume we'll get tapped to the full extent. But it can't come close to covering it.
Nope.
What is
So the only thing that Metro could do at that point, I mean, most of Metro's costs are labor. You know, 80% of the costs are labor. So Metro would need to lay off enough people to bring the budget down and then cut service corresponding with the workforce reduction. That could mean all the sorts of things that we talked about, you know, a year ago or whatever that was when kind of the doomsday budget was on the table. You know, potentially having to stop service to certain stations, adding, 20, 30-minute headways, all those kinds of things would have to be back on the table. So we're trying as a board to have this conversation now, knowing you're right. I mean, it's not that far away. We'll be a year from now, that will be the budget we're looking at. So given the way that Congress doesn't work, from my perspective, I was gonna say work, we need them to understand, if they want us to continue service to fuel the recovery, which is what we want to do, and I think they wanted us to do, then they need to be prepared to meet this need sometime next year, or some combination thereof.
Thank you. And then last question, the bills that are crawling through Congress currently, do they include any?
They're all capital. So, and they're all, they're infrastructure bills that could help us with the capital budget. I didn't even really talk about it tonight, but part of this budget proposal was another $2 billion in capital spending. It's largely the state of good repair type of projects that we've been talking about. I didn't go into all the details and specifics, but they're good projects that continue to make progress on state of good repair. State of good repair is something that those, people like us that have been around a while, a couple of years ago, it's all we talked about. And then we kind of forgot about because we did it, the money's there. But for Metro, the projects every year stack up. And even with that, there's a deficit of the number of projects they can get to. So if there is new money that becomes available, they would be able to do more and basically make progress on all that stuff quicker. The other big piece potentially with the capital, with this stuff that's working through Congress could be in what we were talking about earlier, which is electric vehicle and fleet transition. Because all those issues that we talked about in Alexandria are just so magnified for Metro. And you're talking about literally billions of dollars of new expenditures that's not accounted for in anybody's budgets or projections to be able to do that. So potentially, maybe there's federal money for that with some of these things.
But John, if you asked your question a different way, is there new federal aid coming for operating?
Not for operating, no.
The likelihood is 1%.
Yeah, no.
Okay, I think that's Mr. Turner, next to Ms. Garvey, and then Mr. DeFrenti.
Well, did I understand you correctly that they think the biggest determinants of ridership is liability and headwinds?
Reliability.
No, reliability.
Reliability. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, when you said liability, I'm thinking
Reliability.
So if, and Matt, you mentioned a number of reductions in fee in fares in order to try and incentivize people to get back on and try and hit the 53%. The underlying assumption there is that that's a key determinant, and yet based on what Paul is saying, it doesn't sound like
it's
a
not
key determinant.
Right.
And yet it's the only one you have any control over. The bigger existential question is that also presupposes that people are leaving Metro to get in the car. But we also know that they're leaving Metro to get into their desk at home.
Yes.
And that's a pretty serious issue. I don't know how suddenly you incentivize to get over the 53% if the real problem is the fact that people just have learned to live a different way without Metro. I mean,
That's
pretty
true.
serious.
Yeah, I think the amount of money here on the fare stuff, quite frankly, is relatively minimal in the context of a $2 billion budget. And I think the reason for that is what you said, what the approach that was taken was more based on fare passes, because that way you get people to commit to something they're purchasing up front, and that sort of commits them financially to having, so it could help a little bit, in that regard, even if they're only going to the office twice a week or whatever, they still can have, however it works. But yeah, and that's why for next year, for the 24 scenario, we're at a 75% ridership level. And I'm not sure we ever will project higher than that. Pre-bid.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. DeFrenti, then Ms. Garvey.
So you mentioned the trains are inspected every 8 days. Do you know how, will be? Do you know how often they're inspected now? Just for
90
days.
Okay. Wow.
And that's the standard.
For that particular issue. Yeah.
issue.
Okay. So, the scale of the reduction in the 7,000 is not yet clear.
Correct.
Okay. And then right now it's 7,000 is not operating through November 15th, but I infer from what you said that it would be at least a couple of weeks, probably.
If it's approved.
If it's approved, it would be at
It
least.
could take
2 or
at
3
least a
weeks.
couple of weeks.
Okay. Thanks.
Ms. Garvey.
Yeah. First, I think I need to say thank you to you guys. I think we, you know, we will double your salary rate.
0.0.
Yeah, exactly. Or even add 4 more zeros. It's fine.
Or at least your meeting attendance.
Yeah, no, thank you guys very much for that. And my question, I get, in a way, it's sort of been answered. When I listened to the, Matt, you're just talking about the various fare incentives, which was cool. I mean, it was interesting. And I thought, oh, they're gonna see which works. I mean, I wonder if in some ways it's just kind of, let's see if what appeals, and maybe as you said, people have changed their approaches and it may be very different. And I think it's clever actually to try a whole lot of different things at once.
Yeah, and we did some of it in September. So one of the things that I also asked for today was, you know, are there any results that they can share? And they're very cautious because there's so many factors that go into things trends. But, you know, when we offered that discount, how many people actually took it? You know, was there an uptick from the week prior to the week after in the number of people that purchased passes with us, you know, offering a discount and advertising? I would hope that there was, but I don't have those numbers. I'd like to see them.
Yeah.
And the weekend flat fares.
Yeah.
But we don't want to, you know, Libby, we don't want to go out too far because we don't know what the new paradigm is going to be and what is the model of Metro going to be moving forward. And there's so many factors, you know, so many of the underlying assumptions for the ridership for the 53%. You know, when does the federal government come back? Are people going to the office 2 or 3 days a week? Or are they ever going? You know, what percentage of the workers that were pre-pandemic are never coming back? What's the estimated growth in the region, you know, in terms of jobs? I mean, there's all kinds of things they plug into these models. And it's actually pretty sophisticated.
It's simple, cheap enough that they go see a museum or something, you know, maybe people just change what they do. Yeah. Cool.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Snyder. And I'm actually going to give Mr. Snyder the last question. We're a little behind schedule.
Thanks. Regarding FY 23 and 24, was any thought given to reduce service on FY 23 in order to stretch out the federal money so you're not running empty trains in FY 23 just to create a fiscal cliff in FY 24? Question number one. Question number two, is Metro willing to work with our other bus services in Northern Virginia on looking at how we implement electric vehicles?
So on the first question, the challenge with it is it's a labor issue. So the only way we save money is to lay people off. So if we were to do that in 23 and lay people off, which would be contradictory to what the senators and the congressmen who gave us the money want us to do and told us that they're very clear about that. They were really giving us the money to keep people employed. So the concern would be angering them. And then the secondary concern is in this labor market, once you lay people off, trying to get them back. And we already have an issue right now with Metro Bus in particular, having enough operators. It's a challenge. So if we do get to the point where we lay those folks off, we have enough of a recovery, we need to hire them back, are they going to be there? So I think, you know, although the board, this just got this proposal today, I think there's going to be reluctance to doing it. And could we save enough money to really avoid the cliff? You know, no, we could maybe smooth it, you know, mitigate it a little bit, yes. But it's a very legitimate question. And it's, I think, one, I mean, I've raised probably every finance committee meeting for like the last 3 or 4, because I want everybody to kind of understand on the Metro board, this is the scenario. On the zero emissions, and Paul, you can chime in here too, that I think I would say that Metro views itself as sort of the hub for the region with the most staff and the most technical expertise to be able to do something like this. And so I would anticipate, you know, a very collaborative approach to how Metro is approaching the transition to zero emissions. You know, it's going to have to, it's, you know, we're doing it first in the district because that bus facility is the one that's up next for rehab. And so that's sort of part of how it plays out. But I think, you know, you could expect the Metro staff to be as collaborative as possible, and certainly that's what we want.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the suggestion Josh had about, you know, maybe charging stations on the Metro sites would be a natural thing. I know several of you with local bus systems have, you know, places or stations that are destinations for a lot of buses, you know, so it's, you know, it's going to be a real a real challenge. But I definitely think they're open to it. And I think we've impressed on them that they have to be leaders of this. And I think there's a lot of the information that Josh shared tonight that we heard about, but now we're hearing from someone who's actually dealing with it day to day and trying to implement it is a big difference. Because, I had to chair some of the public hearings for this bus barn issue, and, people just think, no, you need to do it now, and, you just plug it in and you're done. But that's what people think. They just think, okay, you buy the bus, you have a charger, you plug it in, and
Well,
And-
Tesla came out to my house and put in a charger, and I just plug it in, and it's
Which is
great.
the point. A lot of those folks saying that are not the ones that have to rely on the bus
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah.
So, that's the trade-off.
But hearing this, I think, and especially I know for you all, I know you're all looking at this issue, and these are big things. But then there's also that logistics piece of working with the power companies.
Right.
And that is a
Oh, thank you.
huge, and even Metro with its, sort of presence and everything, working with the power companies is a
deal.
real challenge.
Well, thank you both so much. And I just, we often do sort of a perfunctory shout out to the Metro, or the Omada committee, but I want to just take a moment. We have been trying, in the interest of moving meetings along, to shift as much work committees as we can. And the next committee meeting on December 16th really is going to be about this budget. So that's a great avenue for some of these, wider ranging conversations about the philosophy of the budget. I don't want to deny anybody the opportunity to get into those really meaningful conversations, but the committee will be a great opportunity to do that.
And Madam Chair, if I could, I just want to acknowledge Andrew as well.
That's where I was going next, if you
okay.
don't mind. So we don't obviously have the chair of our Omada committee. Our Alexandrians had a conflict tonight, but we are really delighted to have Andrew Doivetter here, who's going to give a very brief presentation. As you all know, one of the things that we are charged by the state with doing is an annual report on the performance and condition of Omada, which is a huge lift for our NVTC team, and we appreciate them very much. We're going to get a sneak peek of it for Mr. Doivetter and maybe talk in greater depth right in December.
Absolutely. Next slide. There we go. So as mentioned, this report is required by state code for us to submit annually. It contains safety, reliability, financial, and ridership performance data, as well as the uses of Virginia's dedicated capital funding to Omada. Of course, the part of the report that involves the most guidance from the commission and the committee is the strategies to reduce the growth and cost and improve efficiencies, which are shown on the screen and on the slide. NBTC staff have worked with the committee over several meetings to update these for the 2021 annual report. These are just a highlight of the many strategies. The most notable, of course, are to leverage the relief, encourage people back to transit, basically lots of strategies there to rebuild ridership. And there is a full draft of this in your meeting materials. The next slide shows a high-level a high-level summary of the expenditures from the dedicated capital fund. That's the $154 million. They're shown by CIP category on the left, the largest being business support and stations and passenger facilities, reflecting all the wonderful platform reconstruction work. We've highlighted several capital accomplishments from just the fiscal 21 capital program, and there's obviously a lot more in the report that we are currently working on. And as for next steps, again, we're updating the safety, reliability, ridership, financial performance data from the National Transit Database and Metro Performance Report. We're working to incorporate feedback from the last Omada committee meeting to make sure the report is current and has the appropriate context on the derailment, as well as what was just discussed with the upcoming challenges with the gradual ridership recovery and the exhaustion of federal aid. So we are all hands on deck working on it now, and we will prepare it for action for the commission in December and submission by December 15th.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all that really hard and statutorily required work. Before we leave Omada, I just wanted to officially say a warm welcome back, Ms. Letourneau. It's really good to have you back in person. We've been seeing you. Okay, the elephant in the room, what everyone's mind is on, the legislative agenda, and where we go from here. I am going to turn things over actually to our Legislative and Policy Committee Chair, David Meyer. Obviously, this is a transitional time, maybe to put it mildly. So there is a lot that your committee has been doing, and I know that we're joined tonight by Ms. Perrin Seibert, our legislative liaison in Richmond, as well as some experts in Richmond as commissioners. And then we will also have a federal update because that's been moving quickly as well. So without further ado, Mr. Meyer, over to you.
Thank you, Chair Crystal. Here's the understatement of the evening, that the legislative landscape regarding transportation is very dynamic, both at the federal and state level. So we're going to begin with a presentation by our consultant, Amy Perrin-Seibert, about an overview of the elections and an outlook for the 2022 General Assembly, and that will be followed by a summary of where we are on the federal landscape by our Executive Director, Kate Mattice. So we'll begin with Amy.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great.
You can turn up a little bit.
Oh, okay. I'll see if that is that any better? I hope.
That is. Thank you.
All right, great. Sure, no problem. I know it's a little hard in the room to hear. So thank you all for having me. And I will try to be as brief as possible. Obviously, as the chair just said, Tuesday was a very big day and a very different outcome, I think, than a lot of us expected. So we are all trying to figure out what's happening and where we are. And I know that, at this point, what we're looking at is new statewide offices. Obviously, Republicans won the governor's race, lieutenant governor and attorney general, and everybody is starting to put together their transition teams. In the House, it's a little bit more, I would say, up in the air, I guess is what I would say. Right now, the numbers look like they could be 52 to 48 with the Republican majority. But I do know there are 2 seats that we are still waiting to see more ballots to come in, I think by tomorrow. And I know the speaker is there who can speak to that better than I can. I'm happy to defer to her or to any of the other members of the legislature. But I do know that there are more ballots to be counted for 2 races. And I think until then, and nothing is certified, obviously, either. So none of these races are certified. So, but that is the potential outlook for the moment. Obviously, the Senate was not up for election, so that remains 21-19 with the Democratic majority. So this will be obviously something that we have to work with here at Nbtc. This is an entirely different landscape than it was just at the beginning of the week and what we've had before. So obviously we have worked with Republicans and different administrations throughout our time at Nbtc, so that'll be no different. But our biggest thing will be really kind of relooking at our legislative agenda, which we have a meeting next week to do, and talking about our strategy and what that looks like, and educating a lot of new people about what Nbtc does and the importance of transit and rail in Northern Virginia. So I think that's going to be our real main focus for me and Alex to be able to work on, along with Kate and the staff, on really preparing and educating folks about all the good work that's being done up in Northern Virginia, as well as Metro. So I'll be working with Greg on that piece too. So with that, I will obviously defer to the members of the legislature who are here if they have anything they'd like to say.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. I think Amy got it exactly right. And there are still two races currently. As a result of legislation that we passed this year, we will be considering ballots that are received up until noon tomorrow. So there's 2 races that are, probably between 150 and 200 votes each. Obviously we're waiting to see what those numbers are. There's a lot of people who voted early, a lot of ballots out there. It could be 50, it could be 500. We just don't know. So we should know tomorrow, assuming both those, that we get all that information. One is in Virginia Beach and one is the Hampton area. So it depends. I think one is likely to be in around 2 o'clock. The other might not be until 5. And then Amy is exactly correct. If the Democrats win both of those seats, then that means it's 50-50 power sharing. And to answer the question before it's asked, who knows what power sharing means? That's been determined and yet to be seen. And if you lose one or both of those, then it'll be 58 or 59, right? 48 or 49. And yes, and the Democrats have definitely already lost control. The most that we can do would be to power share.
Well, thank you both, and thank you to the chair of the committee. I know we'll be, I imagine, taking a fresh look, and I think educating sounds like a great point. And I'll just editorialize myself that back in 2018, we had some really powerful friends from the business community championing Metro and the critical nature of transit to the future of the region's job growth. And our governor-elect has said that job growth is his #1 priority. So I think we'll be relying on some of those partners in that coalition to continue to make that case. And a big thank you to all who worked so hard. And I think it's a real credit to how hard the Northern Virginia delegation has worked on transportation and other issues that all of those seats that had changed hands in Northern Virginia stayed. So we appreciate you all. Okay, anything else on the state side before we turn it to Kate for an update on the, Ms. Matthijs for an update on the federal space? All right, Ms. Matthijs, over to you.
So I sort of keep going and looking at Twitter and what have you, but there is potential that we may see a federal infrastructure bill, a reconciliation package soon. It's best to say it that way. But the reality, when we look at the transportation space, it is highly unlikely there's going to be a lot changing structurally in terms of the funding package. And just as a reminder, what we're talking about is mostly highway transit and places like Omada, VRE, PRTC, and what have you. As Josh Baker referenced before, there are federal competitive programs that would be funding bus and bus-related facilities, whether they be just in general or ones that are low and no emission. So those are ones that I know we're watching very closely. There may be some interest by our jurisdictions to be applying for those types of federal funds, even though they may not be formula fund recipients. So what we have going on, at least in the surface transportation world, is that Congress did do an extension through December 3rd. So in some ways they have sort of until December 3rd, or they'd have to do another extension. And so we do have an overview of what's found within those legislation in the in your packet. I don't really want to dive in it too much, but as Mr. Meyer is going to be sharing with us shortly, we do still have sort of a placeholder in our legislative agenda that does contemplate a new federal package. And so obviously we're going to see what's going on. I'll do a plug for another committee meeting, as we want to have a lot of activity happening in committee meetings. As Amy made reference to, next Friday morning, just here at NBTC, we will have a legislative committee meeting. And that is really going to be diving into strategy and really finalizing anything. We will be coming back in December for approval for our legislative agenda. So.
And speaking of education of new folks, do you want to preview our December 6th event?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I will. And so indeed we do, and I think we have a flyer here. We do have our legislative briefing joint with PRTC the first Monday in December, which I need to remember what that date is. I should know off by heart, the 6th. They'll be down in Springfield. We have confirmed that Secretary Valentine will be joining us probably remotely. And we do have an invitation out to U.S. Deputy Secretary Polly Trottenberg. We don't have a confirmation yet, but she may be joining us as well. And then obviously we have Paul Wiedefeld, Rich Dalton, Bob Schneider, myself will all be sort of giving an overview of priorities. That's always been a really well-attended event. So we do look forward to everybody. And we have invitations out to all of our delegation and to be there. So we'd love to see folks there.
Thanks so much. All right, mark your calendars.
Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
Just very briefly on the legislative agenda, I hear that the committee is meeting November 12th. I think the sooner we get a new draft, I know we're going to be approving it in December, the better. And I'll just reiterate something I said at our last meeting. It's probably more important now than when I said it at the last meeting, which is that we're coordinating with NVRC, PRTC, our NBTA, our jurisdictional staff, because frankly, to your point earlier about the business community being important in this conversation, it's going to be really important that all of us stay on the same page and try to mimic the language, especially involving transit, infrastructure, and transportation funding as we can be. And so, us collectively is stronger than us individually slicing this up. And so I think that coordination is more important now than ever.
Well put. Yep, and we work very closely with Tracy Boehner, working with the authority. And actually also I've been working with Bob Schneider on the PRTC one, but NVRC is another one.
We will work hard to get that draft out ASAP after the 12th meeting, which is at 8:30 in the morning, if anybody's up that early. But But you're absolutely correct. There's probably nothing more central to preserving and enhancing our regional economic strength than transit. So, got it. Thank you. That's it.
Very briefly, can any of you, I'm confused, I have been for 6 months on this now. I think I have this right now based on what Kate just said. So the infrastructure bill includes money for transit.
Yes.
The reconciliation bill includes money for human infrastructure, not transit. The infrastructure bill has passed the Senate, is now in the House. The House has linked the reconciliation bill with the infrastructure bill. They could split it out and pass infrastructure, in which case infrastructure passes because it's been done by the Senate, but they have linked it to reconciliation. So infrastructure and reconciliation, which has no transit money in it, is holding up the infrastructure bill that has transit. Do I have that right?
In general, there may be one or two programs in the larger bill that may benefit transit, so I want to be careful about that. But in general, the large bulk for public transit is sitting in the infrastructure.
Okay, thank you.
As of today, you're right.
Or this hour.
Or this hour.
Right. Well, thank you all. I've noticed that we've been joined by our hardworking team from VRE, which is joined from Nbtc. If you gentlemen want to make your way to the front, we again, our Alexandrians are caught up with some requirements back in the city today, but we are pleased to have Mr. Walkinshaw, who's the secretary of the VRE Operations Board, to play Elizabeth Bennett Parker tonight and introduce and preview the VRE items for us. But let me begin. We have Mr. Dalton here to give us his CEO report for information.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, Commission members and others. I'll be concise. We do have a presentation right after this, and we want that to be the focal point. So, but nonetheless, you do have in your packet the CEO report and other materials from the October VRE Operations Board meeting. And so let me just hit a couple of the highlights. System-wide on-time performance for the month of October was 86%. Ridership for the month of October to continue to increase one rider at a time to about a little over 15,000 riders for the week, or 3,000 average daily riders. We do continue to monitor the projections for return to work from the employers in the region and anticipate ridership to continue to increase, maybe jump to 2 riders at a time throughout the rest of the year. And of course, we're getting a lot of information, I'm sure, as others are, the potential for some employers to start bringing back employees in person as early as the beginning of the new calendar year. So we continue to monitor that. Our staff continues to work primarily from a remote work environments as our own return to work plans have been stalled as well. So we do continue to maintain a continuity of operations with all of our business functions operating effectively. So that is my concise report, Madam Chair.
Beautiful. We appreciate it. Thank you so much, Mr. Dalton. And Mr. Walkinshaw, we do have an information item, so I'll turn to you to introduce it.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a for invitation of Delegate-elect Bennett Parker. But information item 8C is regards VRE's debt issuance, and we're fortunate to have officer of VRE here with us again, Mr. Mark Schofield, who's going to provide information on the financing analysis for the proposed CROC-backed debt issuance. VRE committed to this issuance as part of the funding agreement that was executed in March 2021 between VRE and DRPT. The financing analysis is being led by VRE's financial advisor, PFM, and VRE will return to this commission in December of 2021 with an action item requesting authorization to move forward with the preferred financing alternative. And in early 2022, the commission will be asked to give final approval to the financial and legal structure of the debt issuance. Mr. Schofield, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Walkinshaw. Thank you, Madam Chair, Commission members. Mr. Walkinshaw teed that up exactly the right way. Let me just run through very briefly sort of where we are in the process of the debt issuance. These are the actions that the Operations Board has taken, but obviously for something as big as a debt issuance, all of these then get referred up to the commissions for their action also. So the first action, as he mentioned, was the authorization to execute that agreement with, at the time, DRPT and now VPRA, wherein we agreed to use this EROC money, a combination of a debt issuance and then some pay-as-you-go contributions in order to support the TRV, the Transforming Rail in Virginia program. We then came back just a couple months ago with our debt management principles. We had to amend and change those because at the time that they were adopted back in 2013, nothing like a debt issuance like this was contemplated. So we talked about what a debt issuance like this might look like, what sort of the guardrails are, the expectations in terms of it being investment grade, things like that. So all of those were added to the principles. Where we are right now is that third block coming back to the operations board and then next month to the commissions with a proposal for how we want to access the debt markets and asking for the commission's approval to really move into the actual implementation of the debt issuance. And that would involve bringing on the underwriters, bringing on the trustees, working with bond counsel to do the due diligence, all of those things. We've been in sort of a planning stage now. We'll be asking your authorization to move into, as I said, into the implementation. And then you will get one more bite at the apple early 2022, where we will bring the actual formal debt documents back to the commissions and ask for that last approval. And then we would go to the markets not too long after that. Next slide, please. So what we've been doing with PFM, and I also want to give Scott Colcorf my appreciation. We've been working together on this, so thank you, Scott. What PFM has been helping us to look at is two different things, really. One is a credit assessment. So regardless of exactly how we come into the markets, generally, how do we expect them to look at a debt issuance backed by the EROC, which is ultimately backed by regional gas taxes. And then the second question is, once we've sort of judged how we think the markets will look at that, what is the best way to then actually come to the markets and issue the debt? I'm sure all of you know well the ratings agencies, Moody's and S&P and Fitch, excuse me. They all have their own different methodologies for how they look at certain bonds, but they're all looking at generally the same kinds of things. And so what they're looking at here, if you look, the boxes on the top are really kind of the macroeconomic questions that they're looking at. So how strong is Northern Virginia? Very strong. What does the tax base that you're looking to leverage look like? Is it a gas tax? Is it a sales tax? Is it something more narrow? A gas tax is generally, sort of good, but not great. It's not as good as something as broad as a sales tax. And then they look at what's been the volatility, what's been the performance of that revenue in terms of looking at the risk. And then the boxes on the bottom there in the graphic are really sort of specific to the issuance that we're talking about. What are the mechanics of how the revenue is collected? In this case, how DMV collects the revenue, how it gets sort of allocated to the two different commissions, and then how it gets to VRE. Are there any sort of delays or issues with that? The box in the middle, what's the coverage? So of the total amount of revenue that we have coming in, how much are we committing to the debt versus how much would we have to cover the debt if there was a problem? So if we were committing all of the 15 million to debt, that would be a coverage of 1. That would be relatively risky. We're looking at more at a coverage of 2 times. So looking at only using half of the money that's coming in to then be used for the debt service. And then that last box is more sort of technical issues in terms of what are the bond covenants, what sort of protections can the bondholders have. Next slide, please. The methodologies that the ratings agencies use are actually relatively transparent, and so you can sort of recreate them and get a good estimate of what your rating is likely to be. So that's what PFM has done here. The green column is, at least preliminarily, what they think that a EROC-backed debt issuance would be rated. Moody's on the top row, their estimate is that we would be at sort of the bottom of the AA range, if you think about triple, double, single A, and that for the S&P, we would be at sort of top of the A or the bottom of the AA. We actually were in the room with PFM. They have also been working on the I-81 bond program, which is also backed by gas tax revenues. And they got the word from Moody's that was going to be AA1, which was actually a bit of a pleasant surprise. That was one notch higher than they were expecting. They were expecting AA2. That is probably the most immediately comparable one to what we're looking at doing, given that it's very recent, given that it's gas tax based, given that it's in Virginia. We do have the HR TAC down in Hampton Roads, and then also the NBTA bond issuances. Those both also ended up AA. Those aren't gas tax primarily, though. Those are mostly sales tax. We can talk about this a little more either tonight or at the meeting next month. But I think in general, the idea is here, there's a lot of confidence that we will be able to come in at that investment grade, sort of AA. Not exactly clear what notch, but that the market will be receptive to this debt issuance. So then, next one, please. Once we've sort of judged what we think the market's going to look at, how the market will look at it, then the question is, how do we want to access the market? And so we looked at 5 different options listed here. A number of these VRE and the commissions have actually used, at least relatively recently, so they're not new to us. The first one is just a sort of classic public bond issuance. This is how the original revenue bonds for VRE were issued. The second is the Virginia Resources Authority. I imagine a number of you know VRA well. If you've done some bonding for, water and sewer, or transportation, or jails, things like that. It's a way for jurisdictions and agencies to sort of join together if you have a small or medium-sized issuance, and sort of all go together and get cost savings on doing the issuance that way. VRE, if you were here in 2018, we used VRA to refinance our existing debt on the rail cars that we have. The next two then are 2 different US DOT programs. One is TIFIA, the other is RIF. TIFIA is aimed at a broad range of transportation projects, highways, transit and rail, ports, and can either be direct loans or sort of credit support. RIF, of course, given the name, is aimed more directly at railroads. VRE has not to date used the TIFIA program, but we did utilize the RIF program back in about 2008 when we initially purchased those rail cars that I mentioned that we were then later refinanced. And then the last one is the Vtep, which is the Virginia Transportation Infrastructure Bank. We didn't look at this as a primary financing option, but more as potentially a supplementary option. Maybe we could do a public bond issuance, but then have a portion of it be through Vtep. They have a very low cost of interest in terms of it's a program that's managed by VDOT essentially. We were able actually to sort of strike 3 of these off the list relatively quickly. For VRA, in order to join that program, we would have had to have the jurisdictions give their credit support or their backing to the issuance. And we had said right at the outset that we wanted this to be a revenue bond. It would only be backed by the CROC and would not require a pledge from the jurisdictions. So that took that one off the table.
I don't want to force you to go straight to spoilers, but if you want to let us know the likely option, and then if folks have questions.
I'm sorry. We have 2 likely options. I absolutely.
Thanks.
Our top 2 are the public bond issue and the TIFIA. TIFIA would generate more proceeds, but would take longer, would have a more uncertain process of applying with the feds. The public bond issue would also give us more control over the bond covenants and would allow us to refinance more quickly in the future. We have been in consultation with BPRA through this entire process. Obviously, all else equal, they would like more proceeds because we will be handing the proceeds over to them to assist with the purchase of the right of way. However, they absolutely recognize these other sort of non-monetary considerations. So we will be coming back to you in December with a recommendation for the public bond issuance with the concurrence of EPRA. There we go.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it. And I think one of the most important things to communicate to this group, because I know it's been for the operations board, is to just know that none of our individual jurisdictions full faith and credit is on the line here, that this is entirely backed by the CROC debt. So we'll take nothing else away. I think I saw, so was it Mr. Senator had a hand up. Is that right?
No, I think you just answered the question. that I
Oh,
had.
great.
And-
Okay. That's
and
the most
I
important one.
think I'll be looking for a legal opinion, a written legal opinion on that, as we take any official action. So what if the gas tax fails? Then what happens?
When you say fail, you mean like long-term ends up being, we all end up driving electric vehicles, or do you mean a political action at the state level?
CROC is the gas tax, right? The gas tax supports CROC.
Yes.
Okay, so what if a gas tax is eliminated, or just hypothetically?
So
Find new governor.
I think at a certain level, anyone buying the bonds understands that they are undertaking the appropriation risk that is associated with the CROC. I wouldn't want to speculate sort of beyond that about why such a political action would be taken. I think.
Well, yeah, okay. It's late, I don't want to get into this, but we need this totally, it seems to me, for us to make a decision on this. Totally fleshed out potential liabilities either for this body or individual capacities for our jurisdictional capacity.
So maybe if I could put a finer point on it, if we could ask Mr. Schofield, maybe with our bond counsel, maybe with our VRE's new counsel, to perhaps be prepared to walk us through what recourse a buyer of that debt might have in the event that revenues evaporate, the ones backing the bond. Just sort of a bit of a primer on that, maybe it could be helpful.
Sure.
Fair enough. Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Meyer, did you have a question, or is it the same vein?
Well, actually, it's sort of a follow-on to that. Of which one is these, you're gonna get the best rate, the cheapest money, and fastest?
Those are two different ones. The cheapest rate would be TIFIA. The more quick one would be the public bond issuance. But I would say that we have committed to the same amount of debt service. It's not like we're trying to minimize our debt service. The debt service is given, we're trying to maximize the proceeds given other considerations.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, well, we will see you again next month, I think, and it'll be an opportunity to maybe delve into Mr. Snyder's queries as well.
Sure.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you. And then, I'm sorry, I stepped on your toes, Mr. Walkinshaw, if you want to tee up the other VRE item for us.
This, the final item for VRE is 8D, which is the 2022 legislative agenda. Serves as guidance for the staff and the contracted legislative liaisons during the session. It also includes federal legislative and regulatory issues that are relevant to transit and commuter rail in the US and VRE. Specifically, the legislative agenda, to Chairman McKay's point, aligns with NVTC's legislative policy agenda, which was also introduced earlier tonight. And both NbtC and PRTC are scheduled to act on their respective legislative agendas, as well as VREs at their December meeting.
We'll seek alignment. Mr. McKay. Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to move us along unless you see any burning questions. Thank you, Team VRE, for joining us this evening. We appreciate you. We'll see you next month. And then we will go to Director Mitchell. So glad to have you in person tonight. And I think you are introducing a colleague to preview briefly a study for us, I think.
Yes, so I will forego any verbal comment, if any verbal report, and just refer you to the written report that is in your packet. And related to item C on the agenda, I just wanted to let you all know that the Commonwealth Transportation Board last month did vote to move forward to approve the Omada annual reporting requirements and found no issues. So I'd like to introduce Jennifer DeBrule, who's on the phone here. She is our Chief of Public Transportation for DRPT. We were asked to give a very brief update on the Transit Equity and Modernization Study. And so she'll be doing that virtually now.
Welcome, Ms. DeBrule.
Good evening. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Loud and clear.
Great. I am going to be very brief and give you an update on our transit equity and modernization study. We can go to the next slide, please. So the equity and modernization study was required by House Joint Resolution 542 that passed earlier this year in the 2021 General Assembly session. And it is directing DRPT to develop a needs assessment and an action plan to advance more equitable and modern public transit in the Commonwealth. There's a lot of language in the bill around engagement and ensuring that we have a very open and engaging process for the study. I can tell you a little bit more about some of those examples in a minute. And we do have 6 technical topic areas that are spelled out in the legislation that we have to address in the study. Everything from accessibility and infrastructure to electrification and emerging technologies, safety, and then system engagement and governance. So it is a very broad reaching study, unlike anything else that's been undertaken around the country. Next slide, please. So in terms of our process and our timeline, we have 2 legislated time-focused markers in the bill. We have an interim study report that is due to be submitted next month, and then the final study report is due to be submitted in August of 2022. Beyond that, we've broken the study basically into 4 pieces, starting with data collection, moving into a baseline conditions assessment. That work will be completed and documented in the interim study report, and then we'll be working on the action plan and the final report as we work through 2022. We can go on to the next slide. So progress to date. We have completed our data collection, a very comprehensive effort to collect a lot of information from our transit agency partners. Can't thank them enough. Everybody's been super cooperative. We've collected a ton of information. One of the most interesting things we've done so far, from my perspective, is a series of 7 rider focus groups where we've been able to engage with transit riders from around the Commonwealth and get some really detailed and direct feedback. And then we've also provided all of our transit agency partners with outreach kits to get the word out about the study to the folks that are riding their systems. In progress, and we're wrapping up right now the baseline conditions. In addition to that, we've got a comprehensive study website. I'll have the address for that up momentarily. We do have a transit equity committee that's comprised of 12 transit CEOs that are acting as advisors throughout the study process, along with 4 technical working groups that are comprised of transit agency staff, local government, VDOT, and industry thought leaders from around the country, and some additional stakeholder meetings. So those items are all in progress as we wrap up those baseline conditions. And then upcoming, we're moving into that focus of developing an action plan and working towards that final study report that'll be done towards the end of next summer. So go on to the next slide, and I'll talk a little bit more about the action plan, because I think this is where we have a real opportunity to outline some key measures and metrics that we can move forward with after we complete the study, and actually while we're continuing to work on the study. So based on the findings from that baseline condition assessment and all the data that we collected, the interim study report that's going to be coming out shortly, all of those items are going to inform the development of a study action plan. And we've really felt like it's so important with this study to come up with actions and recommendations that have a clear pathway to implementation, that are strategic in nature, and they're really outlined to address barriers by those 6 different topic areas that are outlined in the legislation, and give us some very specific actions, next steps, responsible agencies, and timelines associated with them. So we want to put a lot of thought into that as we move into that action plan. We do also think that this action plan is going to advise changes on what we do. We have a lot of funding programs and policies, prioritization methodology, funding formulas that are certainly going to be informed by this effort. I think that's going to be a big outcome, and then the development of future plans and policies by the agency. and a framework that is associated with those and how we interact with the transit agencies around the Commonwealth. This is a very interesting and a very different study from what we're used to doing, but it's something that we think's got a lot of value in terms of how the Commonwealth interacts with transit agencies and how, individual transit agencies take this information and choose to establish priorities moving forward. You can go on to the last slide, please. So for more information, we've got a website. It's vatransitequity.com. Lots of information about the study and ways to engage in the process and keep up with what we're working on. And happy to answer any questions, or anybody can reach out to me for more information.
Thank you so much, Mr. Roll. We appreciate that. Mr. Steiner, I think you were the one who'd been interested in hearing this, so I'll give you if you had any questions or feedback.
Yeah, look, it's late tonight. I think the question is, when can NBTC seriously look at what the proposals are? And is the action plan simply, we know what we're going to do and it's just, when we do it? That's my big question, because I suspect we've got a lot of interest in what this plan is going to recommend. So when do we have a serious engagement as NBTC to influence what this plan says that it wants to accomplish?
That's an excellent question. I don't know if, and the other sort of layer to that might be as well, is that a way that we can task our commission staff to weigh in. We want to forge a tighter relationship between the team doing the study at DRPT and one of our committees, for example. Mr. Brill, do you have any thoughts at this time, or is that something you'd like to reflect on and come back to us with?
Certainly, we welcome the engagement of your staff in any of our technical working groups or in any elements of the study process. I would say that our interim report is going to highlight some themes of what we have heard and set the stage for us to have a much more detailed conversation as that action plan is developed. So I think that to Mr. Snyder's point, that's a perfect opportunity for NBTC and anyone else that's interested to engage and help shape those recommendations.
So is this a 2022 thing then?
Can you hear that question? This is a 2022 deadline?
Yes, the final report has to be submitted by August of 2022.
So it looks like early in 2022, we really need to focus on this, because the formulas are changed, it can make a huge impact on the flow of dollars to all of our service. So is that
So if I could, and just because I know that Mr. Roll and I were chatting, my understanding is next year, the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee, TESDAC, and that's I'm a member of, will be engaging in that on a very high level. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. At a deep level, meaning like monthly meetings, at least that's the heads up that she gave me. So we are going to be engaged with that when it talks about the formula, because that goes through TESDAC. So we'll keep you all in the loop as that gets kicked off through the year. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, excellent. Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to conclude us there. Mr. Bull, thank you for joining us. Director Mitchell, thanks too for making time to be in person. Please, everyone, if you can hang with us, we're going to go to our executive director's report, which is our final item for open session, but then we do have a closed. So hang in there and over to you, Ms. Mattice.
So again, as I often encourage you to read the executive director newsletter, we do have some little slides up here that I just want to highlight. Pass along after 6 years at NBTC, Dan Goldfarb has moved on to Mitre Corporation to dive into all the good technical stuff that he loves so much. He's moved on, but we're already actively recruiting for his position. Just want to pass that along. And also thank and recognize our chair for a fantastic job at the Alliance event last Thursday morning. She had some very tough questions and she handled them, as always, with incredible grace and style.
I did not be too opinionated.
So we've obviously had staff out doing lots of presentations. It's great to be out doing things. Obviously, we'll be doing a lot more. We've talked a lot about upcoming committee meetings, legislative briefing. And so I know we want to stay close on time. So that is what I have. Everything else is in the book. You'll need to read it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Okay. So unless there are any questions for Kate, I'm going to make a motion, which is the following. Pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.23711A1 of the Code of Virginia, NVTC moves to convene a closed session to discuss a personnel matter concerning the executive director's performance evaluation. Do I have a second?
Second.
Oh, universal. Give it to Ms. Pelchak. All those in favor of that motion to go into close, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we're gonna move into closed session, give our staff a minute to depart the room and for the YouTube to be paused. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have fun. We are, I'm operating.
You got the agreement.
Actually change anything. They cut it twice.
I really had this whole model. And that doesn't even include Jason, the costume, your daughter and my son.
You were, no, it's a good question.
Yeah.
You're right.
Oh my God. All right. Are we live streaming again? Another minute. Are we live again?
Katie, it's you.
Really? Everyone hate hearing their own voices.
Definitely heard.
That's on a different.
Yeah. I was like, wait, who's
Thank you.
Okay, all right, so let me first make a motion to certify on closed session. The Northern Virginia Transportation Commission certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge and with no individual member dissenting at the just concluded closed session, only public matters that were lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under the Freedom of Information Act were discussed, and further, two, only such public business matters as those identified in the motion by which the closed session was convened were heard or discussed or considered. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, great. I'll give it to Mr. McKay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, great. Unanimous agreement. Consistent with the discussion of closed session, I move that we create a fifth amendment to agree to our agreement with the executive director that reflects an increase to her annual base salary of 3%. Do I have a second for that motion? Seconded by Senator Eben. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Thank you so much. I imagine I will have